This is an MTR Fab video. This is MTR. Today is a part 2 of this botched brake job. So if you're tuning into this, there's a first part of this video. I'll give you the short and brief. Is I went to put this back together. Excuse the shadows. But I have clearance issues in this area. I don't have enough space for a new bracket to fit in here. So at this point, I want to disassemble this side, and we're going to assess if everything is correct in there. And in order to have some sort of idea of what things are supposed to be, I have a service manual, and I also have some reference parts and pieces. So these are standard bits, OEM parts. This is OEM, but this is an aftermarket rotor. I think this is an OEM nut, but this is an aftermarket axle. And I don't know what's going on behind this piece. And I honestly think that this could be the culprit. Because if this lip were to be gone for some reason, it would go in further. So I'm thinking that there's a possibility that I put this back together with a worn out hub. But in order to diagnose that, I'm going to need to take it apart. So what do I need to do that? I have an impact gun with a 27mm socket on it. That's going to get me the axle nut, because I'm going to want to pull this hub off so I can pull this whole assembly. So not only do I have to have some big wrenches, which we'll talk about, I have an adjustable miner's spud wrench. You can buy these at like Runnings. Again, excuse the shadows, but this wrench is approximately 18 inches long, and the jaw opens up quite a bit. Careful, it does fall out and turns around, and you can use it as a pipe wrench. But this wrench is what I'd use to get these nuts loose. Now, this is a topic of use what you got, because most people don't have wrenches this big. So unless you have the proper Honda tool, you're probably going to bite at this with chisels. And of course, people don't know that they're left-hand thread, so there's a hint for you. Both of these nuts are left-hand thread. Anyway, I broke these loose. I'm going to take the wheel off. I'm basically going to jack this up from this peg, I think, is what I'm going to do. Put a jack under here, and that's going to keep it up on the two wheels towards that side. We'll pop the wheel off and I'll get back with you guys. One other thing I almost forgot was snap ring pliers. These are Channel Lock brand. Any brand will do, but there's a little spring ring under this, and I'll show you that when we get there. So this nut won't come off, and that's after a couple 100 foot-pounds of torque and an impact gun. So I've soaked it in some WD, which probably isn't helpful for the next step, but I'm going to heat this nut with a propane handheld torch, and that'll just be enough to expand it, hopefully. That I can break it free with a breaker bar and or hit it with a gun. And I'll tell you how successful it is in a second. I should have videoed it, but honestly, 30 seconds of heat. Propane torch only, no oxyacetylene. Just heat the nut up. Try to focus all your heat on the nut. The diameter of the nut will expand. As long as you don't spend any extra time squirting heat into the axle or the hub. You want that stuff to remain as cold as possible while you heat just this nut. Put that off. Now we're here. Broke the big nut free. And actually, I'll tell you a little trick. Sometimes you can just move the smaller nut. I find that most times I have a wrench that's big enough to jar this, and then you should be able to turn this pretty easy. So once I got it loose, I turned it counterclockwise, and it went that way, and now this nut can go the same direction counterclockwise. So they are both left-hand thread nuts. Now there's a collar here, and you see the gap. So I'm going to use those channel lock snap ring pliers. I know these aren't the right tips, so don't condemn me. And I'm just going to pop it off like that. I should be able to walk that around. And obviously, if you have a brand new chrome Excalibur axle, you probably don't want to do what I just did and drag this ring all around it. But on this bike, we're not too panicky about that stuff. I am going to try to just expand this ring and take it off with two hands. But now that that's off, I should be able to get to what I want, which is the root of this, which is right here. And ultimately I want to see what the backside looks like where the sealing surface meets. Now these hubs I've seen are kind of similar throughout Hondas, and I'm wondering if I maybe mistakenly have like a 400 EX one or something in there that's of a different dimension. But we're going to find out here in a second. Still fresh grease. Moment of truth. Oh, yeah. Okay, we're going to clean this up and take a look. So here's the deal. I have not found anything dimensionally that's significantly different. But I've discussed this in a previous video about how the last time I took this apart, it was clear to me that the axle splines were pretty spent. Not only that, but both of the hubs that ride on them are pretty well whooped. And here's an example of that. Is I'm going to grab a hold of this and shake it. I mean, I don't know if you can see that, but that's a good, 1/16 of an inch of deflection. I don't know what's going on there. So I had a plan to mill a piece to fit over this, but I realized I have old ones of these laying around all over the place. So this is the one that came off the bike. This is one I got in my parts bin. This is the rando bin that, if I want to cut a spacer off of this with my bandsaw, I sure can. And then machine it nice and flat. So that's probably what's going to happen, is I'm going to actually just take the center section and I'll make a little sleeve that slides over. I do want to be clear that I would not normally do something like this. But here's the deal. I've been thinking about moving on from the 85 rear end and doing an 86 on this bike, but the deal is there's still a little life left here, okay? The rear bearings have been replaced relatively recently and they're still tight. And I'd like to get the opportunity to just kind of use them up. Same thing with all the splines. They're all beat, but they still work. So, I'm just going to try to get a little more time. So I'm going to put this spacer in there, and hopefully I can get the spacing correct on the caliper, at least better, so I can use it and tighten up the axle nut proper. That would make me happy enough for now. And then I could just think about what I'm going to do later. So I think that's probably the shortest investment of time. I do want to be clear that this is an older part that is still available. Last I checked, I think you can get a 400EX axle nut and it's the same thing. So I'm not feeling too hurt about modifying something like this and using it. At least it got used. So I threw the hub on, I'm going to throw the rear wheel on just to get it off the jack for the night, and I'm going to move on for tonight. I'm done. I'll get back to this tomorrow and we'll finish this up. I think I figured it out. So this is you are looking at the left side of the rear sprocket hub. Now this is an aftermarket hub on an aftermarket axle, and it has a lot of movement. Finally figured out a way to show it to you pretty good, and that's never really bothered me, and I was aware of it. But what I wasn't aware of is that it moves from left to right on the axle quite significantly, if you can see there, and that's about the thickness of a rotor, and that's where I'm getting that drag. This, when I tighten up the axle nut, gets pushed all the way out where it's tight, and when it's out there, the rotor that locks, that you put 100 foot-pounds or so on. So the solve in my mind for this, and you can actually see down here, I cleaned it up to see if it was worn. It's not worn, it just moves significantly from left to right. And because of that, it's as soon as I tighten the axle nut up, I lose the space between the hub of the brake rotor down here on this side. I'm going to make a 3mm spacer out of the inside portion of this, and I think that'll fix my problem, and I'll get the rest of the life out of this until it shears the hub. I guess I would think the aluminum hub would fail before the splines on the axle, but I guess we'll find out. I think this is what I'm going to try. I've got my mini mill, or my mini lathe here. I've got the spacer loosely on here, grabbed on the inside. I'm getting a pretty good grab. I think I can do it. I don't have a proper parting tool, and I've never had much luck. I'm not a machinist, but I've never had much luck parting on this machine anyway. So I'm gonna use this carbide tip to just cut me a nice path lightly that I can follow with this handsaw, and then I'll just rack up in here and hold it and part it off, and then hopefully I'll be able to grab it again if I need to, but it should be pretty flat enough for what I'm looking to do with it. Just checking stuff out. Everything seems to be spinning fine. What I'm gonna do actually is stop this, and I'm gonna wire brush the inside of this because I didn't even do that. I'd like to try to make this just a cut it and done thing. So I'm gonna shoot for about 3mm. I really don't care. I'm gonna just use the brake rotor as a reference. It's close enough, and we'll go from there. Okay, got the groove started. There it is. Did a little hand filing on it. Looks good. Measures up nice. I'm gonna put it in, and I'm gonna put it in the bike, the factory side in, and that should space it out. We'll see if I can get the axle nuts to torque spec and still have space for the bracket to go on. If I can, I've effectively fixed this issue for now. Obviously the axle's pretty well worn out, and anytime it could just fail. So I'm gonna be thinking about converting to an 86, and this hopefully will fix it. I'll let you guys know here shortly. That's the wore out old bracket, and there's what it looks like now. So 3mm was too much. It was about 1.5 mils that I had to mill the spacer to. And now I've got plenty of clearance. The axle nut tightens up. This feels good. And I think we're good to try this. So I think that's the fix, man. I'm excited. Just gotta put the rest of this back together. I'm gonna put the wheel on. And then I'm gonna try to bleed this rear brake, but I think, like I said, maybe it was in a previous video, that the rear master on this, I think, is junk. Well, it's all back together, and I guess tomorrow I'm going to try filling it with some brake fluid and see what happens. It's like 1 in the morning here, so I'm done with this project. I'm going to go finish up my night, and I'm just happy that I stuck with it. Got the spacer in there, got the alignment all happy, the axle nut tightened up like it's supposed to. Everything feels really good. So with that, I'm gonna finish this video. We'll see, because I think there's gonna be more to do with the rest of it. This is MTR. This was an MTR Fab video. I'm signing off, guys. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and share.